Kids nowadays don't really connect with Final Fantasy, at least not the way that its original demographic did, like myself. They also don't really connect with Dragon Quest, and actually, if you think about it, they don't really connect with any video game franchise much anymore. That is, if it isn't a seasonal-based game like Fortnite, Apex, Rocket League, and all of those. It's interesting because Yoshi P, the director of Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XVI, recently did an interview where he stated that the long development times are what is affecting the success of the series the most, and that fans aren't really connecting the same way with these games anymore because of the lost momentum from the development times. And you know what? He's absolutely right. Games like Fortnite release constant content and bring people back season after season to see what's new and exciting. These games are always getting updates and keeping fans engaged with new things and big changes. It's almost like a new game every few months to a year. So wouldn't it be crazy if normal game development worked like that? Well, if you're my age, you know that that's how it used to be. I look back on the days of Final Fantasy I or Dragon Warrior, and these games were highly influential not just for me as budding gamer, but for gamers all over. Then came the sequels, then the sequels to the sequels, then the sequels to the sequels to the sequels. They were able to pump out a new game just about every year to 2 years back then. Speaking from the US, let's just look at how Square ran the Final Fantasy franchise following the mega hit that was Final Fantasy VII. You had 7 released in 1997, you had 8 close behind in 1999, followed by 9 in 2000, 10 in 2001, and then 11 in 2002. How about that? They didn't skip a beat. Dragon Quest saw a similar trend, as did pretty much every big staple series of the 90s and early 2000s. Going back to the 80s and 90s, the active development time for games of this caliber was usually only about a year or two, nothing more. Let's look at Final Fantasy XII now. It was released in 2006. This was a 5-year gap from Final Fantasy XI to Final Fantasy XII. This was considered insane. It was considered vaporware. It was considered that it was just never going to get released. 5-year release gap was considered insane because, like I said, you have to remember back then, 2-year gap was considered normal. But you're probably thinking, well, these are just average run-of-the-mill RPGs. This isn't groundbreaking tech. Well, hey, let's look at Unreal. Let's look at the Unreal Engine and Unreal. In 1995, Epic Games started working on the Unreal Engine. And guess what? It was released in 1998, and this was considered an eternity. And this was revolutionary tech with brand new forward-thinking game engine and groundbreaking game design. Even then, with something like that, 3 years was considered a long development time. But you're still wanting more examples, I hear. Well, let's look at Ultima. Ultima 5 was released in 1988, 6 in 1990, 7 in 1992, and 8 in 1994. Wing Commander was released in 1990, 1991, 93, 94, 96. Hey, look at StarCraft and Brood War in quick succession. Now let's look at the big boy, Crysis. You know, everybody knows Crysis. With all those exciting steps forward in technological advancements, it took 3 years to make. This was the development cycle everyone was accustomed to, and this was the one that we kind of took for granted. If you think about it, this was the development cycle that created mascots. This was the development cycle that grew bonds between players and characters, and that allowed for all new kinds of connections between fans and franchises. The only franchises that come to mind as accomplishing something similar these days are the massive games from Naughty Dog or Bethesda. And when those bomb, they bomb hard. Just look at Starfield. And it's weird because rather than going back to the tried and true method of developing games and franchises and pumping out content, companies now tend to emulate the Naughty Dog and Bethesda and Sony method for producing these $500 million blockbusters, even when these failures are sometimes just completely company-wide crippling. Just look at Square Enix is struggling, Sega is struggling, Ubisoft is struggling. To see what I mean, look, let's go back to Final Fantasy XII. It was released in 2006, right? Final Fantasy XIII was released in 2010, and then Final Fantasy XV in 2016. So which generation grew up getting a connection with this franchise through this period? If you played Final Fantasy XII at the age of 12, by the time 15 came out, you would have graduated college. So what was the last generation to be able to say that they actually grew up with a Final Fantasy? Dragon Quest, same thing. Let's look at Dragon Quest XI. It came out in 2017. Where's Dragon Quest XII? Where's Quest XII, guys? It will be over 10 years for Dragon Quest XII to have come out. What kid can build a connection with that franchise? What adult could build a connection with that franchise at that matter? From my point of view as a software engineer, development times have gotten completely out of hand, and I honestly don't fully understand it. I would actually love to see AAA studios embrace the indie mentality and just kind of pump out content. My brain just always goes back to the 90s, and I just think if a game like Roller Coaster Tycoon could be made by one person in a year or two and had the effect that it had on people, what is stopping a team of dozens of industry professionals from pumping out something similar? I just think, why is similar creation from games from the 90s and 80s and early 2000s such a challenge to do at the pace that they did? Of course, I know that too many chefs in the kitchen isn't good for software development, but you have to remember the exchange of information is at an all-time high. Design paradigms and coding algorithms and design decisions and modern tools are busier than ever. The flow of information is at such an all-time high that a 15-year-old with zero programming experience can learn how to build the Doom or Quake engine in less than a year. Getting projects done more quickly should be manageable. That is, if the project scope isn't absolutely insane. So why is every project scope absolutely insane nowadays? Why can't we just focus on releasing steady content, steady games? Not every game needs to break technologically new ground. Not every game needs to demonstrate some seismic leap in graphics. And not every game needs to be an entire lifelike simulation with all 500 hours of voiceovers and narration. I know I'm speaking as someone from outside the industry, a corpo engineer with no skin in the engineering world, but it's confusing that the industry is prioritizing these near decade-long dev cycles. I guess for me, the answer to a lot of this does kind of boil down to just like MBA capitalism brain rot. Remember when I said I'm a corpo software engineer? Well, in my past life, I was actually a financial analyst, so fun times, woo. It's not just the digital entertainment industry that this brain rot has really creeped into in the past 20 to 25 years. It's not just video games, it's not just movies. If you think Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, hell, even Ford and Toyota, or insurance companies like Travelers are hyping up the most insane of insane product developments. Just delivering and bringing in profits isn't good enough. Company stability isn't good enough. Everything needs to be bleeding edge. Everything needs to break new ground. Everything from the most boring thing needs to use AI now. Today, creating solid, high-quality consumables, whether product or content, is not enough. Increasing shareholder wealth as much as humanly possible is the name of the game. And if you're not doing that, you're failing. You have to constantly be talking about how this future thing that's 10 years down the line is the greatest thing ever. You want to make a series of small RPGs? Well, that's too insignificant. Why aren't you making the last of Grand Theft Auto, Skyrim, Galaxy now in VR with AI? For cornerstone names in the industry, which are publicly traded, this leads to nothing but trying to make nonstop, bombastic, quadruple A style titles that swallow up massive amounts of money and time and just either are a massive hit or sink an entire studio. But there is one company that seemed to realize this error, and they've been on an absolute roll, and that is Capcom, Resident Evil. Resident Evil 7, they've realized that letting established franchises sit around and doing nothing was just, hey, how about that? Not a good idea. So when Resident Evil 7 was such a big hit, they released Resident Evil title after Resident Evil title after Resident Evil title. You might think it sounds crazy, but look at the sales number. Resident Evil has single-handedly kind of saved Capcom from bankruptcy and turned the stock up over 500% in 10 years. This is what nurturing a franchise can do. It allows it to become evergreen, and a consistent franchise makes consistent money. Resident Evil 3 is still selling, as is Resident Evil 2, as is Resident Evil 4. These products continue to find new fans as more and more fall down the rabbit hole of this rich, dynamic, evolving set of stories and gameplay. With every new release, a new influx of interested gamers find themselves exploring the older titles and looking forward to the next. The Resident Evil franchise doesn't push graphics just for the sake of pushing graphics. In fact, most of the graphics are reused assets. Yes, Resident Evil is pretty much an internal asset flip of a game. They are prioritizing releasing games for their hardcore fans. I think Square Enix knows that a readjustment is in order, hence Yoshi P's kind of forward comments. And of course, everybody knows that Sega has been doing this with the Yakuza series since Yakuza 0 reignited the fan base. Sega has prioritized releasing a Yakuza game just about every year, and guess what? They reuse animation, they reuse assets, they reuse tons of stuff. But fans don't care because we're getting solid, good games. So we've demonstrated proof that successful games within a larger franchise can be produced at more normal pace. So it boggles my mind why game companies aren't doing this. In fact, it seems like we're still going further and further and further in the opposite direction. I'm really curious to hear what actual game developers think about all of this, because from the outside looking in, it just doesn't make sense. Now, I am a software engineer, so of course, we want to see good working conditions, and we don't want to see developers crushed under the pressure of quick turnarounds. So I'm really curious, if you're a game developer, would you rather work on a smaller, more easily accomplished project, or the grandiose 10-year project? The career programmer in me says, give me the 8-year project for job stability, right? But you don't get job stability. In fact, what usually happens to these game development studios is that you will be hired onto the 10-year game project and you will be fired within 3 to 4 years, and guess what? You will have nothing on your portfolio, right? What it looks like to me. So wouldn't you as the developer want the more manageable project to have just the constant update to your portfolio and constantly be releasing games into the market and showing your name on the credits and building up this massive portfolio? That's what would make sense for me, but I don't know, maybe other people disagree. I'm hoping the industry finally takes notes on what Capcom has managed with Resident Evil, what Konami is trying to do with Silent Hill, and what Sega has absolutely accomplished with the Yakuza series. But it's possible that developers feel differently, and developers are perfectly fine with these 10-year development cycles. I can't say for sure what's going to happen, but if we have names like Yoshi P speaking out on this, maybe the tide is sort of turning and we will get more active releases for these franchises rather than these 10-year, 8-year, 7-year development cycles. Perhaps, there is hope that we see Kingdom Hearts get resolved, before we're all grandparents. Let me know in the comments. Like I said, this is coming from me who's outside of the games industry. I'm a software engineer for, the corporation world. I've worked in fintech, I've worked in FANG, I've worked in the scientific world, everything but video games. And so when I see the video game industry, it's confusing. It's confusing to me because I see every other industry is focused on quick turnarounds. These big monolithic projects, but with very, very, very small deliverables. Whereas with the video game world, I see massive deliverables, parts of massive projects. And it's like, I don't know. It's confusing. So let me know in the comments what you think.